Today I'm taking two similar slabs and turning them into two very different tables. One will be quick and simple to build, while the other will be complex and custom. I'll track every cost and every minute spent building, and then auction them off to find out which one generates the most profit. And in the end, arrive at what might be my most unpopular woodworking opinion. I'll be curious to see if you agree. Now, you might think you know which one of these tables is going to sell for more. Obviously, it's the custom table. I'm recording this before I actually know, but it's hard for me to imagine it turning out any other way. Here's the thing though. Which one sells for the most money isn't the real question here. What we really want to find out is which path, custom or simple, will have the greatest return on investment. So let's start with something that we do know. The slabs. I got both of them from Woodworker's Source, and this one costs $430, while this one costs $390. And if you're wondering why there's a price difference, it's because the custom one is slightly bigger. And in terms of time that I've spent doing what you've seen me do so far, which is removing all of the bark from the edges, getting rid of any of the bad wood that I don't want on the final tabletop, and now what I'm about to do here, which is stabilize things with some epoxy, I've spent about 8 hours getting both of the slabs to this point. So we can just split that in half and call it 4 hours each. So this is where we are at this point, and we'll continue to keep this updated and check in on it from time to time as we progress through the builds. Now, something that I think is worth mentioning is that to a lot of you, all of these financials and keeping track of everything might be pointless, because to you, woodworking isn't about maximizing profits. It's a hobby. I mean, 14 years ago, that's the reason that I got into it. And I'd be lying if I didn't admit that, yeah, there was a little part of me that dreamt about someday maybe being able to sell some pieces and have a business, but it wasn't my main motivation. My motivation was being creative. And even now, to this day, where woodworking is my full-time job and my family's sole source of income, I still don't focus on maximizing profits. I really try to find that balance between earning a good income and maximizing enjoyment. And my thought's always been that that is how I'll maximize profit in the long run, because hopefully I won't burn out doing a bunch of things that I don't want to do. And I don't know, maybe that's a stupid thought, but it sounds good in my head. So then you might be asking, why do a video that focuses on financials and maximizing profit? Well, people are curious about this kind of stuff. I get a ton of questions in the comments section about how much I sold a particular piece for, or how long it took me to build something. So it just felt like a good topic to cover. Here I'm cutting the slabs down to their final size. And the main reason that I'm doing that is because of this section on the custom slab, where you can see that things get pretty rough and gnarly. And since the live edges are going to be exposed, it's not going to look great or be very durable if I leave it this way. So essentially I have to cut it off on that table, and then because I want to keep things on a level playing field for the auction, I'm also removing about a foot of material from the other slab. Now after we get that done and then flatten the tops is where these two tables are really going to start to differ. And it brings up an interesting topic that we need to think about for this little experiment that we're doing here. So leading up to that point, the tools that we'll have used are some chisels, a drill, a track saw, and then the CNC to flatten everything. And then to finish the simple table, the only other tool that we'll need is a sander. But for the custom table, we're going to use a bunch of stuff. A table saw, a joiner, a planer, bandsaw, routers. Conservatively, I'd say like $20,000 worth of tools. So the question is, does it make sense to count those in the experiment? And I don't think so, because they're things that I've purchased over 14 years and used on hundreds of projects and will continue to use. But I think it's still worth pointing out that the simple table could be built with a much smaller set of tools. Honestly, if push came to shove, I think you could build it with a circular saw, a drill, a sander, and some chisels. Assuming you pay somebody with a CNC or a wide belt sander to do the flattening for you. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that I think it makes the most sense to only track the variable costs like materials and time, and leave the fixed costs like my tools and my rent out of the equation. And speaking of that, let's do a quick check-in of where we are input-wise so far. Okay, Now, like I said a minute ago, this is where the two tables are going to really start to differ because now it's time to build the bases. And let's start with the simple table base. Now, as I was saying, this is where things are going to really start to differ. And now let's move on to the custom base. So I came into the idea for this video without knowing exactly what I was going to build for the custom table. And part of the reason for that is I didn't know what the slab was going to look like until I got everything all cleaned up and cut down to size. That said, pretty early on, I did start coming up with some rough ideas, and I want to share all of them here really quickly and tell you why I decided to skip some of them. So here are 6 of the ideas that I decided not to build. These two are kind of the same. The only difference is that on this one, the legs sort of cross in the middle. And then this one is different, but same kind of style. And the reason that I passed on all 3 of these is, honestly, I just felt like I've built a lot of pieces that are similar to this, and I wanted to do something different. I guess I'm trying to branch out a bit. Then there was this idea, which I kind of abandoned before I really got anywhere. And then this one, which I actually really like and is probably a design that I'll eventually come back to. But while I was drawing, I stumbled across something else that I liked more. And it evolved from this idea, which, if I'm being honest, is probably the ugliest of this bunch. But I guess that's a good lesson. It's not necessarily about where an idea starts, but where it ends. And after a bunch of drawing and iterating, here is the idea that I eventually landed on. And I know it doesn't look like much in this drawing, but I really do think that this one turned out to be one of the prettiest tables that I've ever built. Seriously, that drawing does not do it justice. So to build this, we're going to start with the shelf piece because that's kind of the hub that everything's going to connect to. So eventually the shelf is going to look like this with a full round over on both edges, and I'm aiming for it to be exactly 1 inch thick. And then the leg panels will get shaped like this so that they can attach to the shelf. Now the boards that I picked to make the shelf were pretty bowed, and they also weren't thick enough for me to be able to flatten them the traditional way while maintaining the 1 inch thickness that I need. So I'm going to use a little woodworking trick. Instead of doing any flattening or thicknessing before I make the panel, I'm just going to joint one edge on each board, rip them to 7 inches wide, and then glue them up into a panel that's 14 inches wide. But when I do that, I'm going to make sure that I align them in a way so that one of the boards has the bow side up and the other one has the bow side down. That way the forces will counteract each other, and that should eliminate about 80% of the bow without doing anything. All right, now after about an hour in the clamps, we can remove the panel and see if it worked. And we're down to about a 1/16 of an inch of bow remaining without having lost any thickness. So now I can easily bring the pieces down to 1 inch without having to worry. Okay, let's do a quick check-in. On the simple table, I bought the hairpin legs for $93. And on the custom table, I've rough cut the leg panels and made my shelf. For material to make those pieces, I used about 17 board feet of walnut, and at about $18 per board foot, that would be $306, which would put us here. $776 and 11 hours invested on the custom table, and $523 and 8 hours on the simple table. So I'm going to edit down another 3 hours of work into a nice little 30-second montage here, where you see me making my leg panels and then cutting in that little notch that'll get them to perfectly bite onto the shelf. And at this point, the custom table's starting to run away with things in terms of time invested. But while I was doing that, my hairpin legs came in the mail. So let's see if we can't close up the gap a bit. So after I got them unboxed, I made some marks to help me decide how far in from the ends I should place them. And a lot of times people just slap these really close to the ends, which I don't think looks good. So where I landed was 7 inches in from the ends. And I'd say I probably spent a solid 45 minutes just sitting there thinking about this, testing, and then installing them took about 15 minutes. So didn't close too much of the gap there. All right, this project's about to get weird. Have you heard of the subreddit, trees sucking on things? I'm gonna guess that most of you probably haven't, but I assure you it is very real, and I promise this has something to do with the project. So basically it's a group where people share pictures of trees that have grown around different objects like signs and fences, that kind of stuff, so that it looks like the tree is kind of eating whatever it's growing around. Well, that's kind of the inspiration for what I'm doing here, which is creating this detail where it'll look like the shelf is kind of, melting through the leg panel. And I hope that it'll create that same sort of intrigue that I get from trees sucking on things, only minus the gross factor. It's hard to explain. I actually researched it to see if there was a word that describes the feeling that it gives me, and the closest thing that I could find was a Japanese word, which I'm sure I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of, but kimokawaii, something like that? I don't know. It translates literally to creepy cute. And I guess that's the new look I'm going for. Who knew? Here I'm going to use another simple woodworking trick that some of you might find useful. So the situation is, I made myself another panel that's going to act as an attachment plate between the top and the base. And I want to drill in holes for a bunch of dowels that'll go between this plate and the shelf. But they have to be perfectly spaced and perfectly aligned with one another, or else things might look funky. So a really simple trick is to clamp the panels together and drill all the way through one piece and into the next. That way they'll be identical. Now I know this is a pretty specific tip, but I don't know, maybe one of you will find yourself in a similar situation someday. All right, here's where we are at this point. And now I want to switch gears and talk about making money instead of just spending it. So obviously I needed to expedite things when it came to selling these tables in order to have everything done in time for this video. So rather than putting them up for sale the traditional way, I ran an auction. Now there's a couple of factors that could kind of skew the results, so I want to be transparent about everything. That way you can think about the results and how they might change based on different situations. So first, exposure. One of the hardest factors when it comes to selling furniture is getting people to see it in the first place. Now, during the 2.5 weeks that this auction was live, thanks to being able to announce it here and on other platforms, the auction page was viewed almost 16,000 times. So that's something that was definitely working in my favor. Now, something that was working against me is that the people submitting bids were doing it based on pictures of the rough slabs and some drawings, rather than images of finished tables. And I have no way of knowing if or by how much that lowered people's bids, but I can't imagine that it helped. All right, with that out of the way, why don't we get to what some of those bids were? And we'll start with the hairpin table. So almost immediately the first bid comes in, and I'm really hoping to kick things off with a good one, and it was for $30, shipped to Alaska. But thankfully, over the next few days, more bids continued to roll in, including a $900 bid, a $1,000 bid, and the queen mother of them all, a $3,000 bid from Astasta. But I had to throw this one out, unfortunately, because I couldn't get FedEx to tell me how much it would cost to ship it to their address. So the winning bid's going to be the $1,000 bid. All right, the custom table. Things started off pretty similarly here with a few lowball offers until finally over the last few days when a series of bids came in that peaked with a $2,300 bid. And I could confirm that this person was real. So to recap, the winning bids are $1,000 for the hairpin table and $2,300 for the custom table. Now let's talk about the inputs. For the hairpin table, the total financial investment ended up being $543, and it took me a total of 12 hours to build. For the custom table, the total investment was $893, and it took me 27 hours to build. So if we take the total profit and divide that by the labor, the custom table netted $52.11 per hour, and the hairpin table netted $38.08 per hour. So what are the takeaways? Well, I guess the first question is, was the extra effort worth it? And yeah, making the custom version increased hourly profit by about 37%. So there you go then. If all you cared about was making money, you have your answer, right? Well, not really. I mean, things are never that simple. The reality is, you can make a case for either path. The outcome here is just one example, and that doesn't mean that I could replicate the same outcome 100 times a year, whatever I would need to do to make it a sustainable business. In fact, there's a strong case to be made for the opposite. The hairpin simple path is far easier to scale, and there's a larger potential market, thanks to the lower cost and less polarizing style. So if all you truly cared about was making the most money possible between the two paths, maybe it's the smart choice. And what all of that tells me is that there is no single correct path, but rather there are options that fulfill different desires and lead to different opportunities. When I started selling things, I did go the custom path, and I had a very hard time making any real profit. But it allowed me to do things like reinvest in tools, improve my woodworking and design skills, and develop the ability to work with clients. Basically, everything that I needed to get to where I am today, where I can take on projects that cost 7 or 8 times as much as what you saw in this video. And I don't say that to brag. I say it because that's how it played out for me. I didn't choose the custom path as a shrewd, calculating, profit-maximizing decision. I had no idea. I went that way because it was my passion, and that was the only thing I knew how to follow. And thankfully, it led me exactly where I needed to be. So this might be an unpopular opinion, because I know a lot of people just want a simple, clear-cut answer. And as much as I wish I could give one, I can't. I don't want to pretend that one exists just so I can neatly wrap up this video. Because if I did, someone might take that as truth and head down a path that's not right for them. So the best conclusion that I can give is to say, just pick the path that you enjoy. Because you might succeed or you might fail no matter which one you take. But at least that way, you'll enjoy the ride. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.